Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Like Christ, our online service. Before we get started today, if you've never worshiped with us at our physical location, and you're maybe somebody from town or somebody from out of town who's come across our online content, if you could, I'd really like you to write a comment below this video and let us know who you are and where you're from, because we can see that people from outside of our community are engaging with our content, but we don't know who you are, and we would love to know who you are so that we can include you in our community and pray for you and keep you updated on all the things that we're doing. So please make contact with us somehow, and we'd love to meet you. And before we start today, we'd also like to say congratulations to Anna and Abi. Congratulations on a healthy delivery and a healthy birth. Congratulations, Gerardo and Susie, and our newest member, Felix. Thank you so much for sharing this part of your life with us and letting us be part of it. And we're so happy that everything went well. And we're so happy to have two new children in the world, especially children born to you guys. You guys are going to have wonderful families, and we're so excited to be part of that. I want you to know that I'm praying for all of you. And I know that some of the restrictions on churches and church gathering are getting lifted by the state of Texas. We're going to keep talking about that and keep thinking about what's right for our church so that we can make good decisions and keep everybody safe. And we'll let you know if there's any changes to our schedule or if we can get back in the building anytime soon. But for the next couple weeks, things are going to be pretty much the way that they are. And so let's get started. I'm going to kick it over to David. He's going to lead us in some worship this morning. And then we'll talk again about spiritual combat and the battle that each one of us has to fight. David?
Morning, everyone. We'll do two songs again Sunday. We'll start with The Throne, which is a song that we don't often do, but I felt it was appropriate for this time. If you've had some quiet time, some downtime, as you've been stuck at home, or even if you've been working, but just haven't been able to go out as much or get a lot of those distractions that we're used to. If you've had time to reflect and see areas of your lives that need change or that you need to confess or bring to the Lord in a desire to be more like Him, I hope the song can help you with that. I hope the song can assist you in confessing and laying some things down before God. There's a battle raging for the Thanks, guys. I'll pass it back to John.
Today I'm going to start by making 3 confessions. The first one is that I have a strange eating disorder that I'm going to call reverse grizzly bear syndrome. It's pretty simple. I eat like a grizzly bear, only in reverse. During hibernation, which can go on for months, a bear has no access to food. It uses its fat reserves to survive, so it's really important that the bear is fat enough to make it through the winter until spring. For the few months leading up to winter, a grizzly bear eats as much as it can and whatever it can find. Salmon, berries, grubs, meat of any kind, garbage, you name it. During that time, the bear is basically a mindless eating machine with one simple imperative: pack on fat. Whatever it can eat, it will eat. The higher the calories, the better. And I say that I have reverse grizzly bear syndrome because I barely eat anything in the summer. I have to remind myself to eat or I'll go days without getting hungry. But in the winter, my appetite takes over and I start packing on the calories. I'll be sitting at my desk, my mind busily thinking about work. My body will stand up without permission and I'll walk to the kitchen in a daze, still thinking about work. Thanks to my coworkers, and you know who you are. Usually there are cookies or sweetbread or cake or some other kind of delicious snack in the kitchen area. I mindlessly fill both hands, still thinking about what I'm working on, and then shuffle back to my office, unaware of what I've eaten and how much. An hour later, I might do it again. If there are cookies anywhere near me as I'm walking around, my hands don't wait for clearance from my brain. They just reach out and snatch those cookies and stuff them into my mouth. By the end of the day, I'll be sick to my stomach with no idea why. There's a complication to all of this, and that's that I have a digestive disease. It's very important that I watch my weight and my sugar intake, since both of those things really affect my overall health. I know this. I've done diets, exercise programs, New Year's resolutions, calorie trackers, all of it. I've firmly decided multiple times to never eat processed sugar again. But what happens? Sooner or later, my willpower wears down. I've been doing much better over the last 2 years or so, but I still think that if there's a pack of cookies in the room with me, the odds are about 50-50 that I lose self-control, forget my resolutions, my body overpowers me, and I fail at the thing I've firmly decided to stop doing, and I eat all the cookies. What's wrong with me? Why can't I just make a decision and stick to it? Here's another confession. About 3 years ago, I was betrayed. Someone that I had considered a friend started to intentionally spread false rumors about me. He actively tried to get me fired from my job. Worst of all, he was kinder than ever to me in person, all smiles and handshakes. But I saw the emails and I heard the phone calls and I knew that he was trying to turn other people against me. Now, I was raised to defend myself, to stand up for myself, but I decided to try a different tactic this time. Instead of confronting my enemy or scrambling to defend my reputation, I tried the Jesus way that Peter talks about in 1 Peter 2:23. When he was abused, he did not return abuse. When he suffered, he did not threaten, but he entrusted himself to the one who judges justly. It was hard to do that. My pride was wounded. I was worried that my old friend's little campaign of lies would succeed and that I would be dishonored in public. But I waited and I suffered and eventually it worked out. My old friend got frustrated that he couldn't turn enough people against me. He made one final unsuccessful attempt to embarrass me, and then he just removed himself from my life for good. I trusted God and he protected me. Lesson learned. Praise the Lord. That was the end of that, right? Wrong. A few strange things happened to me after all this was over, and it took me a long time to understand what was going on. First, all the things that I had wanted to say but didn't say to defend myself played on an angry, nonstop loop in my head for weeks and weeks. I was more upset about the whole thing after it was over than I ever was while it was going on. I woke up thinking about it. I went to sleep thinking about it. I would have imaginary arguments with this person as I drove around running errands. I had decided to trust God, and God had come through and protected me from real harm. I should have felt peace and gratitude, but all I felt was angry and tense and consumed. Then, and this is the weirdest part, I made up my mind not to talk about this situation with anyone. It was between me and God, and we had worked it out together. I had been quietly, privately vindicated. There was no need to share it with the world. But somehow, in every conversation I had with anyone at all, I found myself telling the whole story. Exactly the thing I had decided not to do, I did over and over again. I was sick of hearing myself whine about it, but I couldn't stop the words from coming out of my mouth. I knew the way that I was telling the story was designed to get sympathy, and it did. And I didn't want sympathy, and I was absolutely disgusted with myself. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I just let it go and shut up like I had decided to? And here's the third confession. I've also been on the other side of that poor me narrative. I had a close friend who was struggling with what I thought was a simple issue. For some reason, he couldn't figure out that he was failing over and over again because of his attitude, even though I kept telling him what the problem was and the simple steps that he needed to take to fix it. Still, he wouldn't listen. He kept using me to vent. Every time we talked, he took time and energy from me that I didn't have to spare. And I noticed that he was only rehearsing his own bitterness about the situation because he really didn't want to change his attitude. He just wanted some sympathy. I felt responsible to listen and to offer guidance because I loved him, but I had reached my limit. I just wanted him to take my advice, to get his heart in the right place, and do what he knew needed to be done. I felt frustrated and claustrophobic being around him, and I was starting to resent our relationship. But I decided to be patient, to keep offering the right advice, and to let him figure it out for himself without letting myself get all upset about it. Then, one day, he made the tiniest sarcastic remark about his problem. It wasn't something he hadn't said before, it wasn't anything all that bad, but I saw in a flash that he hadn't heard anything I had been telling him. He was never going to consider that he had any responsibility in the situation. He kept talking, but I felt red hot rage lava boiling up in me. My fists clenched, my body tensed, and I said, "Excuse me," and I left the house. I marched out to my workshop, I slammed the door, I screamed, I grabbed a piece of scrapped wood, and I broke it over a table that I was building. That felt pretty good, so I did it again. I started screaming and cussing and breaking boards until I was out of scrap wood and I was just standing there in the middle of a big mess. Then, like a light switch turning off, it was over, and I felt stupid. What did any of that accomplish? I felt unholy. Is this how a man of God deals with his emotional problems? I felt lucky too. In a slightly different situation, I would have said some things to my friend that couldn't have been unsaid, and I would have hurt him and destroyed our relationship for no reason. What was wrong with me? Why couldn't I just be kind and patient like I decided to? I tell you these three stories up front because I want to talk to you about something that seems very strange and otherworldly and mystical, but is actually something we've all experienced many times. Thanks to Hollywood, when we talk about demons, we immediately imagine disgusting, bat-like creatures that possess little girls and make them spasm and talk in deep voices. Call the priest, grab a cross and some holy water, draw a pentagram and find some chicken bones. There's a demon here. Of course, that makes for a scary movie, but it is way outside my experience. If that's what demonic possession really is, then I've never seen it in person and I don't know anyone who has. Which means that if it's real at all, it's not very common and I'm probably safe and I don't need to worry about it. On the other hand, I just told you three personal stories in which I decided very firmly to do the right thing. I felt overwhelmed or possessed to do the wrong thing. I lost all self-control and I did the one thing I had decided not to do, and then I became, for a brief moment, a vessel for sins that can have serious consequences: gluttony, pride, and anger. It may shock you to hear this, but these aren't the only 3 times something like this has happened to me in my entire life. Oh no, it happens plenty, and sometimes it's much worse than what I feel comfortable sharing with you. And don't tell me, don't worry so much about it. That's how anyone would have responded in those moments. I'm not anyone. I'm me, and I'm the one who's supposed to have self-control of, well, myself. Why can't I just make up my mind to do the right thing and then do it? If it's not me making those decisions, then who is in charge here? It's terrifying to realize that I can be overpowered, overwhelmed, overtaken, or possessed by desires or thought patterns that reflect the exact opposite of who I want to be. I don't know about all the Hollywood stuff, but I do know that it does feel downright demonic to wrestle with your body over what you're eating, to argue for weeks with someone who isn't there, to explode in anger when you're trying to hold it together, or to try to stop yourself from having one more drink when you know where it's going to lead, to try to stop yourself from texting your ex even when you know where that's going to lead, to stop your hands from typing in that web address that you promised yourself not to look at ever again, to remember who you are when you're with that person who always makes you feel terrible about yourself. In all these situations, you feel overwhelmed by some other evil power that wants to break your self-control and ruin your life. Yeah, it speaks in your voice, but it's not who you really are, is it? The New Testament mentions demons and evil spirits quite often, but frustratingly, we never get a clear definition of what they are. The New Testament writers just assume that everybody knows. Sometimes demons are throwing little girls into campfires or beating up exorcists, and it's really Hollywood. But sometimes they're making grumpy old men shout things in church or tricking young Christians into treating their bodies too harshly. In our rational age, some scholars have claimed that ancient people were confused and they just thought mental disorders were demons. There is some overlap, but the ancient writers attribute all kinds of health problems to the work of demons, while at the same time, they do mark a difference between physical illnesses of all kinds, including mental health problems, and the work of evil spirits. So the whole thing isn't very clear. What we do see, though, to varying degrees, is that when the New Testament talks about demons, people are always being overwhelmed by some other evil power that breaks their self-control and ruins their life. Whatever that is, that deceitful, seductive, possessing, unclean energy, that's at least part of what we mean when we talk about demons, and that means that we all have a lot more experience with the demonic than we would want to admit. This all presents a problem for us in our rational age. We don't want to look superstitious, so we sort of deny or ignore the possibility of metaphysical things like demons. Most people today believe that our bodies are all we are, that my genetics and my environment and my brain hold all the answers for who I am, how I behave, and how I think. But there is a horror in that idea that is way worse than any demon. If my brain is all that I am, then every ugly thought, every uncontrollable impulse, every negative emotion, every disgusting desire that flits through my mind every day comes from nowhere else but inside me. I am a broken machine. I am a poisoned well. There is something deeply, frighteningly wrong with me. I need to be medicated or lobotomized or institutionalized because the polite face that I show to the world, my best intentions, it's all just a trick. Way deep down in my subconscious, I'm really a monster. Now, we are flesh and blood people today, and that is a very flesh and blood conclusion about the nature of evil. In fact, the conclusion itself almost sounds demonic if you think about it. It's inevitable that evil will overwhelm me from time to time. There's nothing I can do about it because that is who I really am biologically. If I was the enemy, I would certainly want people to ignore me and spend their whole lives feeling guilty about what I tricked them into doing and thinking instead of fighting my influence. The ancient Christians weren't buying it. They believed in the spirit world. They believed that those moments when we feel overpowered, those attacks on our self-control, even all of the sewage that flows through our minds every day, all of it comes from corrupt spiritual forces that are trying to corrupt us too, so that they can spread their corruption and misery into the physical world that God has made. This is what the Apostle Paul meant when he wrote, "For our struggle is not against enemies of blood and flesh, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the cosmic powers of this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places." There are two monumentally important ideas in this one verse, ideas that are crucial to your long-term spiritual health and your overall well-being. The first idea is that you should never identify yourself with the worst thoughts and feelings that present themselves to your mind. Just because those things are there doesn't mean that they came from you. It doesn't mean that you have to attach yourself to them and act them out. And it definitely doesn't mean that your ugliest thoughts are who you really are. Your own flesh and blood isn't the source of all evil. There is a spiritual battle going on in the heavenly places, and your mind just happens to be the front line. The second crucial idea here is that you are not a helpless victim or an innocent bystander to this conflict. You are a combatant, whether you like it or not. the enemy has troops at your front door, and all of us have to decide whether to let them in or drive them out every single day. This is how the early Christian mystics understood demons: the unclean, unholy, seductive, possessing thoughts and feelings that appear to your mind in the hopes of overwhelming your self-control and tricking you into doing evil. They believed that anyone was a target for these demons and that everyone was susceptible. But they also believed that the sacred duty of the Christian is to learn to fight the demons when and where they appear. The great advantage of this approach to spiritual combat is that it teaches us to be compassionate to each other when we fail. Demonic attack can get the best of anyone, so we don't have to take everything so personally or judge the character of our brothers and sisters when they hurt us. But at the same time, it makes each of us responsible to discipline our own reactions, our own emotional states, our own thoughts, so that the demons don't gain control of our feelings or actions and trick us into hurting ourselves or other people. The big twist is that the ancient mystics believed that God allows us to fight the demons for a reason. They believed that the essence of the Christian spiritual life is to grow in love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, gentleness, faithfulness, and self-control through the daily practice of fighting the demons of pride, envy, gluttony, lust, anger, greed, and sloth. They believed that this combat has been ordained by God as the testing, the trial, the challenge that will mature us in soul and spirit and grow us up into the full stature of Christ. As we read in Mark 1, it was the Spirit of God that actually led Jesus to fight this battle himself. Mark writes, "And the Spirit immediately drove him out into the wilderness. He was in the wilderness 40 days, tempted by Satan, and he was with the wild beasts, and the angels waited on him." It was God who led Jesus into combat, and it was through battle with the evil powers that Jesus received the help of heaven. And this is the battle that we too are called to fight. The first step in fighting the demons is to recognize that they always attack the same weak spots. If I'm well fed, well rested, and relaxed, if I'm around positive people and my health is good, if I've spent enough time in prayer and gotten enough exercise, if I'm thinking humbly and compassionately, it's usually pretty easy to deal with the odd surge of negative emotion. I see it coming, I decide I don't want to get on that ride today, and I just let it go without a second thought. On the other hand, if I'm lonely or tired or sick or hungry, if I'm feeling defensive or disrespected, or my curiosity or my appetites have been aroused, the battle is much, much harder. That's the cruelty of our enemy. He never attacks when I'm strongest. He always attacks me when and where I'm weakest. But that is also the wisdom of God. Those are the places where I still have some maturing to do. And the attack both helps me to recognize that I need to grow up in those areas and to address the problem through the struggle. The ancient mystics identified the basic categories of human experience where evil powers can overwhelm you, where they can break your self-control and ruin your life. As I describe them, try to recognize which ones are your own weak points. The first place where we're open to attack is in our natural appetites. We have to drink, eat, and sleep or we'll die. We all have strong biological imperatives to reproduce, so even though we won't die without sex, it can certainly feel like it. Those appetites and desires are good and natural and given to us by God, but without self-control, they can also be used by the enemy to create chaos and death. The demons of gluttony and lust try to force their way through our natural appetites until our appetites take over and our bodies and relationships are destroyed. The second place where we're open to attack is in our relationships with other people. We are pack animals like wolves, not solitary hunters like big cats. We actually need each other to survive, which means we need to maintain good social standing in a group. That means that we're vulnerable to demonic attack through our feelings about others. If my community doesn't honor me as I think they should, or I let my own honor go to my head, my pride takes over and I lose all consideration for other people. If someone else has a better position or more respect than me, my envy is inflamed, and I might start to work against them through gossip. I have desires for other people and how they treat me, and when they don't do what I want, I get angry with them, wounding my relationships as I demand respect for my authority. The third place where we're open to attack is in our ambitions. All human beings feel like we have the potential for fame and fortune if we could just discover the right methods and stumble into the right opportunities. We also feel like if we die before that potential is fulfilled, our life will have been a meaningless waste. When our ambitions get out of hand, they become a function of both unhealthy personal pride and a fear of our own mortality. We can be tempted to try any method, no matter how harmful it is to ourselves or to other people, if we think it offers the slightest chance of success. Violence and greed are just waiting for that open door. Or, on the other hand, when all chance of success seems to disappear, or our physical weaknesses overwhelm us, sloth is there waiting to throw us into the pit of despair, where we give up all hope and begin to resent the entire world. Underlying all of these weak points are two elemental human flaws. We are afraid of so many things, and we are desperately in love with ourselves. Any point of fear or pride is a potential place for demonic attack, and we will always be targets for our demons until every fear and every pride has been defeated one by one, face to face, in hand-to-hand combat. But we already know that, don't we? If I could just decide to no longer be fearful or prideful, I would have done it already. But even when I know what direction the attack is coming from, I'm still too weak to do anything about it a lot of the time. And that brings us to the next step in fighting the demons. Paul tells us very plainly what has to be done. He says, "The night is far gone, the day is near. Let us then lay aside the works of darkness and put on the armor of light. Let us live honorably as in the day, not in reveling and drunkenness, not in debauchery and licentiousness, not in quarreling and jealousy. Instead, put on the Lord Jesus Christ and make no provision for the flesh to gratify its desires." To fight the demons, we have to put on the armor of light, put on the Lord Jesus in body and soul. His life and character are our example of a total victory over the forces of evil, and it is only by imitating him and putting his moves into practice that we learn to defeat the attacks of our enemy one by one. Next week, we're going to talk about our spiritual arsenal, the armor and weapons of Jesus Christ that we can use to fight the powers that try to overwhelm our self-control. But today, I want to leave you with two practices from our discussion and from Paul's words that you can bring into your spiritual battle right now. For the body, take some time to think about situations when you've been overwhelmed by the enemy before. Try to identify the fear, the pride, the curiosity, the appetite, or whatever that led you to that mistake. Once you've identified the weakness or desire that made you vulnerable, think about other situations where that same weakness or desire got you into trouble. Now, this is important. Don't let your weaknesses become an excuse. Confess to God that you recognize that always getting angry when you're hungry isn't very Christ-like. Then think about some things that you can do to protect yourself in those moments of weakness. Remember Paul's words, make no provision for the flesh. That doesn't mean don't give your body what it needs. It means don't let your body make its own decisions about what it needs in the heat of the moment. Make sure that you understand that your body's weaknesses and desires can get you into trouble. So train yourself to give your body what's really good for it, and train your body not to throw a fit every time it doesn't get what it wants. This is the foundation of one of our oldest spiritual practices, fasting. But we'll talk about that more probably next time. For now, I want you to be conscious of the situations that lead to your downfall, and I want you to confess those situations to God. Then, for the soul, I want you to learn to practice detachment. Simply stated, detachment is a spiritual discipline that keeps you from getting swept away by every thought your brain suggests. Again, our enemy wants us to believe that our worst thoughts are who we really are. That is not true, and there's a simple way to prove it. As you go throughout your day, your brain will suggest thousands of ideas and actions and feelings to you, but instead of letting your brain decide those things for you or feeling guilty about the garbage your brain presents, simply look at it objectively and say, that's not me. Then let it go and move on. Don't ask yourself why the thought came up or what it says about you that such a thing would cross your mind. Simply detach from it and let it go, because it really wasn't you. The more you gently discipline your body's appetites and gently train your mind to detach from negative emotions, the more you will discover who you really are in the eyes of your Creator, and the more self-control you will have when the demons bring you options that don't reflect your true self. that is a giant step toward Christ-likeness. And the feeling of the freedom that comes from better self-control is one of the greatest blessings of the Holy Spirit's work in us. So as you start to fight the demons this week, may God give you grace for the battle, for your sake, and for ours. And we'll be back with a lot more of the tools and the practical advice that we need in order to fight this fight. We'll see you next time.